Guiding your next pop culture journey, this is In Quest of Geek.
The best explorers and heroes must now arm themselves with the social, cultural, and emotional tools they'll need to delve deeper than they ever have before. This is our Dungeon Dive.
With you on this dive will be Alix, your host and professional moderator.
JPG, pop culture critic and geek educator.
And special guest adventurer, Zoe Hendrix.
So sharpen your social commentary and prepare your most inclusive spells, because we're here to build better character.
Welcome back, Brave Questers, on our newest dungeon dive, A Silent Voice. But a dive this deep is going to need some outside help, and we have Zoe Hendrix to round out our party. Zoe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. Well, I am a ASL teacher, and also I am a coda. And that means that both of my parents are deaf, so I was raised in the deaf culture. I have a lot of experience just living, working, and just having that type of deaf aspect to bring to it. So yeah, I also teach ASL on TikTok, and I have a YouTube channel that has a few videos on it.
On top of being a gigantic anime nerd, correct?
I was gonna say that.
Okay. Yes. I absolutely. My love for anime is there is no bounds. I'm currently wearing an Attack on Titan sweater. On my off days before COVID, I would go to like Anime Expo, Anime LA. I was a cosplayer. I would do panels. Anything I could do to like be involved in the anime community. I am obsessed, to say the least.
And that's why we brought you on for this episode, because A Silent Voice is an anime, and it focuses around a girl who is deaf. And so, I want our audience to know that, yes, we're going to talk about the anime, but we're also going to talk about the culture that this anime surrounds. And then a little bit about the sign with it being a Japanese show, obviously, is not going to be American Sign Language that we're seeing, correct?
Yeah, yeah, it's completely different meanings-wise, but some of the gestures are used in ASL, but they have different meanings. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And before we go too far, where can people find your work?
So I'm on TikTok. So if you search zoeysensei on TikTok or YouTube, you can find ASL videos, usually to do with, so my most recent one is how to sign if you're in emergency services. If you come across a deaf person in an emergency situation, things like how to sign, where do you hurt? The ambulance is coming. So pretty important stuff when it gets to the right person. And then also some fun things. I try to like break down. I'll always have some sort of anime opening in the background of any of my videos, just because it's like a little bit of me in it. But I just try to teach people things that I think will be useful and help when they come across a deaf person. But yeah, Zoe Sensei on both platforms. And then if you want to add me on Instagram, it's The White Geisha.
Now, it's always a little bit jarring when I'm the least prepared for an episode, mostly because I'm supposed to be Alix's expert whenever we do have these types of episodes. But when it comes to dealing with deaf culture, the both of you actually blow me out of the water on this one.
I'm in the shallow end here.
Yes, but there was a lot of learning that I had to do in order to experience this as well. Now, I would say the first question that I have for the both of you is, what was the most true to real life instance in this film? Like something that was just so on the nose that it kind of hurt.
Well, for me personally, it was the I don't know how to say it, the audacity of hearing people, and the way that this film completely showed how hearing people hate being inconvenienced in any single way by someone with a disability, and they are just like, why can't you just fix it? why don't you just, do those hearing aids even work? Like,
I do want to point out, like, I love that you use the word audacity, mostly because it's an it's an incredible play on words, because the first part of that is like kind of
yes,
connecting to audio.
and autism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That was incredibly well put.
Yeah.
Um,
And autism is an actual thing in the deaf community where people just believe that their hearingness is so much superior than deaf people.
It creates the atmosphere that assumes deaf people are dumb, in the same sense where a lot of people assume if you don't speak English or English is your second language, people just instantly assume that you're dumb, without realizing that deaf people can be doctors and lawyers and absolute geniuses, just like they can be as dumb as we are too. You know, it's a full spectrum, just like anything else.
And that's I think it's a very important point, right? Like, I want to reiterate this for our audience. ASL is and any sort of like gestured sign language, right? For any sort of country, that is somehow considered either lower or some sort of second language, or something that is not worth learning. And I think especially here, I would say, and I mean, I might actually be wrong on this, you generally, for like homogenized countries where there's really only one sort of race or ethnicity or something like that, where it's like the majority of it, right? I personally think, and I've read articles that they tend to treat people with these types of, and is disability the right word? Because disability isn't the right word on this one, right, guys?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, being a part of deaf culture is always seen as like, oh, like, well, you're taking one step back.
Yeah, a lot of times.
I think so, but that's like, again, like I can give, for example, in Sweden, they have two national languages. So like when you're talking about countries where it's all just one race and stuff, Sweden, I mean, come on. But
definitely, yes.
Yeah, but Sweden has two national languages, and they have fully embraced the deaf culture, and that Swedish Sign Language is the Swedish and Swedish Sign Language are the two nationally recognized languages. And that if you are a hearing person and you have a deaf child in Sweden, if you don't teach that child sign language by the age of 2, the government will take that child away from you and put it into a family that will teach it sign language, because the government recognizes how important early language acquisition is for a child. And if you prevent that from your child having a language that they can understand, that was created for them, then you are negligent as a parent.
And I think the point that I want to make, especially for this, is Sweden is the exception and not the rule. Yeah. And how crazy that is, especially, and gosh, I appreciate the backgrounds that you guys have for this as well, especially because in school I studied English and just how syntax and language work in general.
And for people that don't know, English is your third language.
Yeah, and it really does shock people, because I think I fake a very good American accent at this point. But another question that I had is that, I guess, like, the views of the quote unquote inconvenience that we have here in America with deaf culture, do we see the same sort of thing in places like Japan, where they are supposed to be considered a modernized country, and now we have to tell and is it like, is it crazy that we have to tell stories in this way? We have to tell stories that are emotionally relevant and available in order to just see how much damage we're doing.
Well, like in Japan, for example, I don't think that they would be on the same level as American society in terms of like being inconvenienced by deaf people. I think maybe there's a little bit there, but I think overall them as a people are very collectivistic, so they all kind of band together for the greater good, and they like help each other out a little bit more than Americans would. It's just the way it is. But I do think that, I mean, overall the inconvenience to the hearing person is kind of what, I mean, nobody thinks about it. Nobody thinks about anyone else besides themselves. You know, see that.
It's something that I think we see without realizing that we see it. So how many videos have we seen on social media where they're like, oh my gosh, look at this amazing moment where this Starbucks employee signed to somebody who's deaf to help them order. Or, hey, this cast member at Disneyland knows sign language. And we highlight it as this very special, precious moment. And it is, but it's sad that we have to do that because there's so many deaf people in the world. And there's just no reason we can't be teaching sign language from kindergarten in school. I mean, honestly, you can communicate with babies way earlier if you teach sign language to them because it gives them a way to communicate before they can speak.
Yes. Yeah. Mostly they will start signing at like 4 to 6 months old and telling you that they need food or bathroom or whatever, which is amazing.
And it proves that this language that we're ignoring could actually help literally everybody. And I know Zoe mentioned this off air, but I think it was off air. You know, you talked about, you know, people go deaf at a later age or, you know, they start to have hearing loss. I mean, my dad is hard of hearing now just because he's older. And how convenient would it be if we could just sign to each other and we didn't have to worry about screaming across the room or repeating it over and over for him, which I don't mind doing, but the convenience of him getting frustrated would be so much nicer to not have that problem.
Mm-hmm. And also, just kind of on that topic of things that help everyone and not just deaf people. I mean, having sign language being mandatory would be amazing, like a required class to graduate or something. But one of my friends who is, she's from Czech Republic, and she was just telling me, she's like, I wouldn't be able to watch half of the TV without closed caption. And it's, you know, it's not just for deaf people, it's for people who are, you know, second English learners or, you know, it's an important tool. And for the movie industry, for years, I never was able to go to the movies with my mom. Like growing up, I wasn't able to see Disney movies in theaters because they didn't have caption. And I would have to, if I did go to the theaters, I'd watch foreign films, you know, because those are the only things that have caption. So it's just like things that are just inconveniencing the hearing person, but mean everything to the deaf person.
And it's really, sorry, I just wanted to also add in as well, too. With that, that's really interesting about like the foreign film aspect, because I actually had to do that just to see Asian people on screen.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to see as to what lengths we will go to, but then some of these lengths, you know, especially, and I think the point that I want to make here is that being deaf really is a culture, because you know, people in deaf culture need to go to the same lengths that people in other cultures need to go to in order to see themselves represented.
Yeah.
Now, just to tie it back to the movie, which is my job, we see, obviously they make it very blatant as an inconvenience, quote unquote, because, you know, they have the teacher come in who's like, oh, we're going to teach 3 minutes a day of sign language. And, oh, why can't she just learn to speak, right? We blow that off. But I think it's also highlighted in the fact that there is not an interpreter in class with her. And you just see the teacher turn his back and start writing on the board. And she's supposed to keep up with that. And then I don't know if I could be wrong on this because I know her mom defends her, but we also never see her mom sign.
Yes, and that is extremely common in deaf family or in families where it's hearing parents and deaf children. For example, my family, both my parents, they're deaf, but so my grandparents are hearing, except for my dad's side, which is like, you know, progressive hearing loss later in life, which got sped up in his case to an early age. But my mom's side of the family, none of them sign. When we go to family parties, we literally sit there and talk on that side of the family, just being like, these don't even. And they just invite us over to put us in the corner of the room and be like, oh, there's the deaf side of the family. We're going to be nice to them, wave hi. But it's, it happens all the time where it's a hearing family that will not sign. And if they do sign, it's usually very basic, the alphabet, maybe spelling a few things, pointing at things. It's no communication, really.
I want to touch a little bit on that as well, right? Like the idea of inclusion. Here, in a silent voice, of course, the first layer of this would be the inclusion of deaf culture, right? While the second layer of inclusion, I think, is the inclusion of involved in friendship, and how the film kind of portrays that bullying is going to be the opposite of friendship at this point, right? There's a gap in understanding that takes you from bullying to being friends, right? I wanted to also try to talk about a little bit about the nature of friendship in this film.
Yeah.
So Alex, if you could start with this first, did the nature of friendship feel organic the way that the story tells it?
I'm gonna say yes. But in different ways. I don't know if that's gonna make sense. But in the beginning, when we're seeing him bully her, there's the idea of us versus them. And because we're following him as the us, he automatically had all those friends. The moment he sold them out and they realized he had gone too far, he became the them and they stayed the us. So then he kind of got segregated and felt what she went through. Now, when he was going to make amends, you have him make friends with the kid on the bench. Again, name's not my forte.
So you're talking. So at first, right? It's if we are considering the quote unquote bully as the main character, that'd be Shoya Ishida.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it'd be Shoko Nishimiya, who would be our deaf character as well. And then the kid on the bench, that would be Tomohiro Nagatsuka. They refer to him. I don't think they ever say Nagatsuka's last name in the film. But yeah, so that's the kid on the bench.
Yeah, so he becomes his best friend, and it's so natural for him to just, look, we're best friends now. And I think that's special because he felt seen. But I also think that changed the way that our main character, Ishida, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, nailed it. That Ishida viewed friendship. I think he changed the game because it was innocent. It didn't have to be an us versus them to be friends. They could just exist. And I think he changes the way he views all the relationships from here on out. Zoe, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree that Tomoe, right?
Which one? I'm sorry.
The kid on the bench, the curly haired guy.
Oh, Nagatsuka.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the catalyst for Shoya to kind of change. And I love the way that the film puts X's on their faces. And it kind of shows you how isolated that Shoya has created himself, because he knew what he did. Like, even though he still kind of is not cool with Nishimura, or he, at some point still in grade school when she was still going to school with him, he pushes her against the desk and is kind of manhandling her. I was afraid it was going to be like a rape scene or something, but
I was so afraid we were going to see something crazy right then. So I'm very glad. It was a little bit sexual in nature, which I think should be like a trigger warning or a content warning for that also, because I think especially how especially how the director framed it and how the animators framed it as well, it did give me a little bit of those vibes.
Yeah, like his knee was between her legs. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they were still not really on good terms, and he still wasn't really understanding her. But I think it takes growth. And then just kind of circling back to that friendship thing, I think it takes a person to grow to really understand what it means to have friends and things. Because when you're little, you just have friends in your class. You have bullies in your class. You don't know why people love you. You don't know why people hate you. But until you go through some things in your life and really realize what true friendship is, and seeing what a true friend is, like when his friend brought him his bike back, you know, kind of doing things for him and taking those X's off of the faces of people, showing that, you know, there are some good people in the world, and you know, you don't have to be a bad person forever. Like, people grow and change. And I think that was really important in the movie, and especially talking about friendship and how he realized after he learned sign language, he's like, damn, she was trying to be my friend the whole time. Like, you know?
Yeah. I was actually going to bring up that scene as well. I think what a lot of the theme hinges on for this film is the idea of translation, right? She was, you know, so Shoko was specifically speaking a different language to Shoya, right? And he could not comprehend what she was trying to say. And when Nagatsuka could show friendship in the same language that they shared, that's when it hit him and he understood what she was trying to do so many years ago. It's the same thing with the X's on the faces, right? He could not translate the fact that these people were, that these are actual people. These were just obstacles in his day at that point.
Now, coming from a different language, this is something I don't have, but both of you do. So, JPG, I'll start with you on this one. But did you share similar experiences as you're trying to figure out language and you're, you know, being put in school with people who don't fluently speak the same way you do?
I think English has a very specific problem with constantly being misinterpreted, right? If you look at the, I guess, like, if you break down the idea of English, it's a few German words here, a few French words here. Like, it's this ridiculous hodgepodge of what we're supposed to be learning as a language, and then we just expect everybody to know it. And so English is notorious for being misunderstood to people who are considered fluent, right? I'll even bring back the idea of text messages, right? How many times have you misread a text message because you didn't put the right inflection or the right emotion or anything like that?
I add emojis so people get it.
And that's kind of the benefit of emojis, right? Like, we can place feelings to the words, right? It's the same idea with how some writers will use bold or italics or strike through or something like that, right? We have to use pieces outside of the English language in order to give context so we're not misunderstood. Not a lot of languages have that extra layer of not being understood, and that's why I think, you know, this film has a better chance, or has a better way of reaching out to Western audiences than most Eastern films do.
Now, Zoe, for you, was sign your first language or English your first language?
Sign language. I was born in Fremont, California, which anywhere there's a deaf school is going to be a bigger deaf population. So California, particularly, there's one in Fremont, and that's south of San Francisco. And then there's one in Riverside. And so being born in a deaf community, I didn't have any access to English speakers. So it was just my parents and, you know, their friends, and all their friends are deaf, everyone signed. And it really wasn't until like I moved down to Marietta, Temecula area, when I realized, like, oh, like, having deaf parents is not normal. Deaf people are not normal. Like, we were the only deaf people in the entire city at that time in the 90s. I was like, okay. Like, this, what?
So it's all a big adjustment for you.
Yeah, it was insane. And, you know, kind of coming back to the whole bullying thing, I mean, I wasn't deaf, but sign language was my primary language, and learning English was a little bit harder for me. I did learn English in preschool and kindergarten and stuff like that. As I went to school, I picked it up more, but I started getting really bullied because I would be talking, and whenever I get really excited, I start signing and talking, and, like, my hands get more animated, and I would have people like mocking me and making fun of me and talking. I don't know. It was just I got so embarrassed that I like would cry. Like, and in fourth grade, you just run home and like bawl your eyes out. Like that's why every time I watch a silent voice, I cry because I feel it, dude. So bad.
No, I mean, it's this is really opening my eyes, right? Especially because when we use the word culture, we tend to use it pretty loosely, right? Even me myself, I describe myself as a pop culture critic, right? And I truly believe that pop culture is a very, very specific subset of culture in general. And I think what helped me most with this film is when I say deaf culture, I think of the same idea as Black culture, Asian culture, Middle Eastern culture, right? That's the same impact that I'm receiving now that I say it out loud.
Yes.
And I hope that's something people get from this film, but they have to know the film is there first. And this has been out since 2016, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through a hard anime binge in the last year, and I only found this because a mutual friend of ours was like, hey, you need to see this film. It's on Netflix. It should be highlighted somewhere. And it's just, I hate to say the name, but it's totally silent.
Yeah.
I guess also, to take a little bit away from the heaviness that we've already spoken about as well, who were some of your favorite or most authentic characters in A Silent Voice? So, Alix, why don't you go first for this one?
Oh, me?
Mm-hmm.
Mine is going to be her sister.
So that'd be Yuzuru.
Yeah. So Yuzuru?
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that she's not just, look at me, I'm a perfect girl. She's herself. And sometimes it's dressing more masculine. Sometimes we see her more feminine. And I like the idea that she can just be her, whatever that is. But I think she had a special connection with her grandma. And I think she had a special connection with her sister, which was lacking with the mom. And so even though she's a younger sister, she was her voice. She protected her. She translated for her. All the things she shouldn't have to do if we were doing things right. But she was willing to step up and be there for her sister so that her sister could have a peaceful existence in the world.
Yeah, for me, I think out of all of the scenes, Yuzuru had this very quiet scene in the third act that just absolutely broke me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when she's taking the photos off of off of all of the walls in their home. And you find out that, as a photographer, she only takes photos of dead things because she wanted to sway her sister away from that idea.
Yeah.
And that outright broke me. That was such an Eastern storytelling punch in the mouth that it took me a while to recover from that particular scene.
Yeah.
Zoe, how about you though? Like, who are some of your favorites?
Well, okay, so I have two. I will tell you why. So number one, it's his best friend Tomoe.
Oh, Nagatsuka.
Nagatsuka. For him, just because I love me a chubby best friend. You know what I mean? Like, you have to love a chubby best friend.
I'm really glad that you're on here with the both of us then, because now we're your two chubby best friends. So.
Yeah, I love it. You can't have too many chubby best friends, and those are usually the ones that will go to bat for you. Like if there is an issue, they're the first ones being like knocking on the door, But I will say Nishimura because, like, the way that they wrote this character, they must have done quite a bit of research in the deaf community or with the Japanese deaf culture there. The reason I say that is because the way they wrote her character was really, really pretty true. And Alix, maybe you can back me up on this, but deaf people in general are really sweet, and they're always willing to give you a chance. And I've never met one in my whole life that was completely negative or outright rude or mean. Just on like right after meeting you, like if you're, then they'll be like, okay, get out of here. But if you're like a genuine person, like deaf people genuinely just want to communicate and have that connection. So like, I don't know, what do you think, Alex? Like the character of Nishimura being more deaf. Deaf.
I had two feelings on it. One is I totally agree with you in the sense where if you're willing to participate and you're willing to try, I've never met somebody not willing to help. I will sit there and poorly spell out words, and then they'll teach me the word in sign so that I can continue the sentence. And that is a slow conversation. Yeah. And that takes patience. And everybody who's done that with me has had the patience to be like, okay, she's trying to sign. She's trying to communicate. I'm down for it. Like, I'm about it. The only issue I had, but I don't think it's not a character flaw. It's just because I'm rooting for her. But to me, she was a little bit of a doormat. But I think that's because you can only get down so many times. Get knocked down, get knocked down, get knocked down. At what point are you done getting up and fighting? Yeah. And so she just, at a certain point, by the time we meet this character, it's already 6th grade. We don't know why she came to this school late to begin with. But you have to assume that this isn't the first time she's been bullied. It wasn't the last time she got bullied. Especially based on like what we learned from the sister, what JPG mentioned earlier. Yes. And so I think, there's a reason that we're getting this doormat side where she's just like, okay, I'm sorry. Like, it's fine. Yeah. I'm sorry, let's move on. And that's kind of heartbreaking because it crushed her spirit. Yeah.
And what kind of person would she have grown up to be if she hadn't been so bullied and taken advantage of and, pushed down, knocked down? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this whole episode is going to be pretty deep because I do want to tie back to what JPG mentioned earlier, and I'll make JPG go first again. Sure. And then we'll bring it to Zoe because I think Zoe's going to have more experience on it. But, you mentioned that with the sister, we see her take the pictures down. Or first, the pictures. We find out why she was taking them to begin with, right? If I show her these dead things, she won't want to be dead. And then at the end, we see her taking a picture of a flying bird. And it's the idea of like, okay, I want my sister to see life now and happiness. But through all of it, it's part of deaf culture. But we see it actually with the hearing main character too. We see it with Ashita. And I think there's a lot of mental health stuff there. And so I just wanted to know your thoughts on what we see with mental health and teenagers through this film.
Well, I would say that Japan is pretty notorious for having unfortunately, some higher suicide rates than most other modernized countries. It's at times, the international community has seen it as kind of like there's a very specific pressure placed on the Japanese young population in general. I use this as an example all the time whenever I talk about Eastern storytelling. A lot of the times we experience stories of people in high school. That's kind of the same equivalent as here in Western storytelling. We tend to see people have very deep stories told in their 20s and 30s. And the idea is that in Eastern storytelling, high school, that is a prime age to tell stories because they are seen as kind of like that peak sort of adult, right? As opposed to actually being an adult, there are very different, I would say, like more droll stories that are told in Japanese and Eastern storytelling. So when we see a high schooler here, when we see a high schooler in Eastern culture storytelling, we're supposed to be thinking of them as like college students or young adults or something else like that. And as a Western audience, we tend to forget that these people are what, 15, 16, 17 years old? So we already are experiencing that pressure because we, as an audience, are supposed to be seeing them as adults or as people who have full control and faculties over their lives at such a young age.
Now, Zoe, for you, I'm going to same question, but a different aspect of it, because you have this culture that we're seeing on screen as a part of your experience. So how would you say the portrayal of mental health was with these kids?
The big thing that from the deaf culture aspect is I do notice a lot of deaf people having issues with mental health, and that comes down to access. It is what it is. Like, they're, getting an interpreter to come to a therapy session or whatever is almost impossible. There are ways, there's some access, but it's pretty few and far between. And so when you see what's going on, it's kind of hard because, okay, so Shoya is kind of in his own. He's got his mom and sister and niece or whatever. And then Nishimura has her sister and such. But so they have people to rely on. But I don't think it's really touched on whether or not they have access to therapy or anything. It doesn't even talk about it. But if they did, I'm almost positive Shoya would be able to get help. Nishimura probably wouldn't. And that's kind of the end here, is that there isn't access, even though it's not talked about. But that's what I found interesting.
And connecting to that as well, it's the idea that how we are portraying these characters are they're on the outskirts of society, right? Mm-hmm. You have somebody who is a part of deaf culture who just doesn't have the access to have others understand her. You have somebody like Shoya who, honestly, yes, he was a bully, but I think that bullying came out of an idea of, oh, well, if I do this, then I have friends, right? Mm-hmm. And then you also have Shoya's mother, who is a hairdresser, and that, like, it being like a creative sort of position, culturally might not be as respected as, like, let's say, like, a business person's job in Japan or something like that as well, right? Something where you put on a suit or a dress in order to go to work. And then last but not least, like, I love that you pointed out the niece, Maria. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the film, you actually meet Maria's dad, who is very obviously an American GI.
Yeah.
and so having her dad be like a black or brown person, and then marrying a Japanese woman, that's definitely looked down upon in Japan mm-hmm. as well. And so it's just so interesting how the film draws your eyes towards the outskirts of society without having to beat it over your head that these are all from the outskirts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I love the person of color aspect. Whenever they pull that into anime, like, what was the last one I saw? Promised Neverland, right?
That was gosh. Yeah.
The and then also Hunter x Hunter. Like, there's always going to be like one or two, which is nice and refreshing. Because they're everywhere.
They are, and I think, this movie has so much, and there's so much I want to talk about and so much I want to dive into. And I know time-wise, there's not, you just, in an hour, you can't touch on everything, right? Mm-hmm. So something I want to kind of bring us back to with this, we're talking about deaf culture, and I want to go back for a second to her hearing aids.
Oh, yeah.
We see it when he's bullying her. We find out he went through 8 pairs of hearing aids. We see the stack of money. We know how much he pays his mom later. So I want, if you don't mind going into this a little bit, just the aspect of hearing aids and the work that goes into having to get them, the price, insurance companies, how much you have to fight, because I've heard the stories. Mm-hmm. But could you touch into that since you have a little bit more actual experience with it?
Yeah, so my mom's profoundly deaf. She doesn't use them, but my dad does. And also, when I worked in the deaf and hard of hearing program, a lot of my students had hearing aids or cochlear implants. And even at the deaf school, my parents would tell me the kids when they're younger, deaf kids, they hate them. It's uncomfortable. It's constantly having to wear something. You're being made fun of for wearing them if you're in a mainstream school. And sometimes they just throw them away. They throw them through the washer. They throw them in the toilet. They just get rid of them because it's uncomfortable and it's unnatural. Like imagine being, in elementary school and having to wear like something that amplifies the hearing in like and you constantly getting feedback if you're close to like a telephone and whatever type of radio and stuff. So it's just really an uncomfortable process. To get hearing aids, you have to go to an audiologist, you have to get fitted, and then even then, if the batteries die, which is like any battery, you're completely deaf, or whatever your hearing loss is before adding hearing aids to them, and they're expensive. I don't know how much they go for now, but thousands of dollars easily, and insurance usually won't cover it. If they do, maybe a portion, but like Alex, like you said, it's a battle to even get them. So,
and
I mean, the issue. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, and I think like another issue that connects to that as well, right, is that being not a part of deaf culture, I think at times that like people like me will assume, they have they have a hearing aid that's just gonna magically fix everything for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how a hearing aid works, or cochlear implant works for between each deaf person is going to be very different than the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also just kind of since you brought up cochlear implant, I would love to let you guys know so the deaf community stance on cochlear implants is extremely political.
Oh,
there are people on either side. I know, as hearing people, you may not, maybe Alex, you've heard of it.
I was going to ask you to go into that, so I'm really glad that you are actually.
Yeah, it's so political. And so like people like my family, which are very big D deaf means like you are part of the deaf culture, you identify as deaf. It's not just a hearing loss to you, it is your identity. So that's my family. So that's from our standpoint, we are completely against cochlear implants for a number of reasons. And then there are some people who are for it and they need it. And I truly believe that there's a place for it. But from my family's perspective, from the deaf culture area that I'm from, I guess you'd call us the far left. I don't know. But we are against it because, number one, it's unnatural. You are surgically implanting something into a usually child's head. And also there are cases of botched cochlear implant surgeries to the point where the child will have some sort of like, I don't know what the appropriate term for it is, but when they are, disabled even further.
I was going to say, the way I've heard it is that they can end up with a learning disability, which people will then just blame on, they're dumb because they're deaf.
Yes, no,
and
not
realize it came from something else.
Yes, so botched cochlear implants can create more issues in children, and then also it's unnatural. And then the only way to get a cochlear implant is to have residual hearing. And when you get one, it completely destroys the cochlear. So if your cochlear implant is not turned on, you're completely deaf. So whatever small amount of hearing you had before, which could have been enhanced with a hearing aid, is completely gone now, and they've made you completely deaf. Not to mention, it's a magnet that sticks to a metal plate in your head. And I've heard from some of my students and other deaf people that sometimes they get headaches from it just because you've got a magnet pulling between your skin and a plate. It's just unnatural. And it's also a big time label that the deaf community is not good enough, that we're here to fix you. The hearing savior is what we call them. Like, I'm hearing and I'm going to save you. I'm going to fix you with this, machine in your head and turn us into Cyborg or whatever that dude is on Teen Titans.
Well, no, I very much appreciate the perspective from this as well. especially and the passion coming from that particular side. Well, to wrap up the show, I did want to ask all of us about, the lessons that we're learning through a silent voice. So, to all of us, and you guys can decide who wants to go first on this, but what do you think is the lesson that you hope audiences take from this? If there's one thing that you hope an audience takes from this, what would it be?
I would say from a broad version, don't be a dick, right? Don't bully anybody. Because you don't know what somebody's going through, right? And so you don't know what your cause and effect by you bullying, what that effect is going to be. And a bully can be an adult. It doesn't have to be a kid, right? We see people go to restaurants now today, and they attack some poor kid working because they don't like a policy, So I would say, as a broad picture, as a less broad picture and a more focused angle, and the lens that I think is really important here is that we have the power to change accessibility right now. And I'm not talking about, hearing savior is a really great word because we talk about white savior all the time.
Oh God, all the time.
Yes. And
honestly, if I don't bring it up at least once on an episode, it's a doppelganger. Just kill him.
Yeah. Right. And so I love that you use that term, and I'm definitely gonna keep that and keep using it. But I think what's important, I'm somebody who's learning about the community, and I can be a voice to say, hey, go learn about this community, but it's not my job to teach a community I'm not a part of. My job is to tell you it's there, and that you should learn from somebody who is a part of that community, who is a part of that culture. And a lot of times it's hearing people go, oh, I learned sign, and I'm going to teach all my other hearing friends sign. And we're missing the important aspect of that culture, of that community. And as, again, I mentioned in the beginning, I'm in the shallow end. I learned about the culture. I made friends with people in the culture. I follow and try to support people in the culture. But at the end of the day, I can't teach it to somebody, and I need to know that, because I'm not here to be a hearing savior. I'm here to learn. And I think it's so important for other people to do the same, so that accessibility and that community can grow bigger and bigger until we're just one big community with our cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zoe, what about you?
My takeaway from the film is just deaf people are real, they're human, and that they hurt too. I think the amount of people who I've met that have never met or heard or know anything about deaf people or sign language is overwhelming. Like, people don't know about the deaf culture. They sometimes are like, how is it a culture? So I think that this film really sheds a light that there are deaf people all over the world, we're usually caught up in our own little bubble. Maybe you do know a deaf person in America, but there's deaf people in Japan, and Japan has their own sign language and their own deaf culture. So I think that this film really does a nice job of highlighting that deaf people are here. There's culture, there's a beautiful language, and you can be friends with them if you just try a little bit.
I think that's such a great sentiment. JPG?
The one thing I want people to take from this is, what is an inconvenience to you is a whole lifestyle to somebody else.
Yes. Yeah, I love it.
It's whatever bothers you is the whole life of somebody else. And I think there's a lot of empathy to generate from that, right? And I think not just with, I unfortunately can't speak from the stance of deaf culture, but where I can speak from is from the stance of being bullied, from the stance of being on the outskirts, and feeling about being on the outskirts of society as well, right? And this film not only does so much justice to deaf culture itself, but it does a lot of justice to the nature of friendship and to the nature of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, before we wrap, I'm going to have you plug all your work again. But if you could add one more thing, since I know that you are going to plug your TikTok right now, could you also plug the importance of adding text onto your TikTok?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, you guys can find me on TikTok, Zoe Sensei. Number one thing, and just going off of everything we're talking about today, accessibility. You may not notice it, but putting captions on your TikTok will help everyone, especially. So imagine like if you're in an area where you have to turn your sound off, but you still want to scroll through TikTok. It sucks seeing something that looks interesting and there's no caption to it. So it doesn't just benefit deaf people, but just that little inconvenience, coming back to it again, like that sentiment here, can mean the world to somebody, and also helps people out in general, because a lot of people are from different, not even just hearing loss, but just, different, new to English, and they may want to read it. It's just, there's so much that can be benefited from just to have some caption on TikTok. Thankfully, YouTube, I have on my YouTube channel, it's Zoe Sensei as well, but it automatically generates captions for you. So if you are a YouTuber, just turn that feature on. It's awesome.
Thanks to Zoe's recommendation, we are going to be putting our podcasts onto YouTube so that people will be able to have the accessibility to watch or listen.
Honestly, I think nobody wants to listen to us in the first place, and now we're just inflicting this on deaf culture as well. So I feel like I'm the bad guy on this one.
So it's Zoe's fault.
Yes, it is definitely Zoe's fault. Yes.
I'm always the gateway here. It's what a coda is born to do. Like, we're literally born to be the bridge between the hearing and the deaf world. So never accepted by either, never fully in both. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Zoe. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited I get to sit here and chat about anime, and if people actually want to listen, I love it.
Guiding your next pop culture journey, this has been In Quest of Geek Dungeon Dive Edition.
Please check out our weekly Dungeon Dive and Tavern Team episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any other podcatchers, and make sure to rate, comment, and subscribe.
If you'd like even more adventures with us, our bi-weekly actual play RPG is in the same feed under Issues, where you can listen to us play as teen superheroes using the Masks A New Generation system.
Please follow us on social media at In Quest of Geek.
And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly Twitch streams at twitch.tv/InQuestOfGeek.
And as we cross another dungeon off our list, here's what you can expect from our next episode.
Next week, we are going to be releasing our Falcon and Winter Soldier finale episode. I know that a lot of people... we actually didn't get to record a first episode synopsis for Falcon and the Winter Soldier because of our transition with Dungeon Dive and Tavern Team.
And I had my wisdom teeth taken out.
And you did have your wisdom teeth taken out, yeah. But you'll get to hear all of our thoughts on the newest Disney Plus series.
Thank you for listening, Brave Questers, and remember, use what you've learned today to build better character.